Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You will hear a parent discussing his son's school report with his tutor. Listen and fill in the missing information in the report below.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good evening, Mr. Jameson. Please sit down.
Good evening. Now, about my son Stephen's report.
Yes, just a minute. Yes, now, what class is he in? Oh, yes, 4E. No, 4A, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Has he improved this year, Mrs. Hargreaves?
Yes, I think overall, yes. Mind you, there is still room for more improvement in some subjects. Let's see. Maths. Well, the major problem here seems to be his algebra. Apart from that, he's doing much better. Could you help him with this, Mr. Jameson?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't really my best subject at school either.
But the overall exam result was encouraging. 60%.
Yes, and history, I seem to remember a bad report for this last year.
Well, he lacks concentration in the class, and of course this makes it difficult to remember things like dates and names, and a memory is quite useful in a subject like this.
Oh dear. Well, I'll have a word with him when I get home and see what we can do to improve that. And music.
Music, yes. Is he still having guitar lessons?
Yes, every Monday after school.
His music teacher has commented that he doesn't seem to be taking them very seriously.
I think it was just a craze he had, Mrs. Hargreaves. I've noticed that he hasn't been very interested in practising at home.
And also, he tends to talk a lot in class. I mean, he's very talkative, and he only got 40% in the exam.
Well, nobody in our family is very musical, so I don't expect him to do very well.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Looking at his geography result, though, there has been considerable improvement, 64%.
Yes, I remember him working at home a lot for some sort of project or something on... now, where was it? India, I think. No, on China.
Yes. And it was an excellent piece of work. I saw it myself and was very impressed. And his art classes have also been going better this year.
Yes, he became very interested in pop art after the school and went to the local art gallery to see the pictures there. His bedroom wall is covered with posters from the shop.
Yes, and 58% is not bad for his exam result, considering how low it was last year. And now French. It seems that he has really taken to speaking a foreign language.
We hoped he would, because it's important to know another language these days, isn't it?
Yes, quite.
That's why we paid for him to go to France last Easter, so he could practice more.
Well, it seems to have done the trick. 80% is a very good mark.
Now, Mrs. Hargreaves, I'd just like to ask you one more thing about...
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear someone giving instructions to staff at a festival.
First, look at questions 11 to 13. As you listen to the first part of the interview,
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Castle Pop Festival. My name is Sandy, and I'm the General Manager of Castle Pop Entertainments. And I just want to take a few moments to mention a few things to you before you go and have your detailed briefings in your work groups. You all have a copy of the plan of the festival grounds. Now, most things are obvious, but I'd like to point out first the visitor toilets here along the side of the main area. Kindly do not use these yourselves. Your own facilities, the staff toilets, are beside the breakfast tent. Also, there are public telephones behind the stage. I mention these two things because they are places that visitors often ask for. For yourselves, one of the most important places is the staff meeting point. This is new this year, and the only thing to remember is that it exists and that when you refer to a meeting point between yourselves, you need to make clear which one you are talking about. The staff meeting point is between campsite 1 and the disabled viewing area. This is not marked on the general maps, but it is marked on the maps you've got there. The visitors' meeting point is, as you can see, in the centre of the main area, between the breakfast tent and the entrance. Now, another important facility is the first aid tent. This is a big round tent, so you can't miss it. It's on the right-hand side of the entrance, again as you come in. There are many other first aid facilities all over the festival site. In fact, there is a first aid box in every tent and sales point, but this is the central point. Finally, I wanted to mention the security on the site. Every year the festival gets bigger and bigger, and so every year we have to increase the security arrangements. We have a number of small security offices, one being near the entrance, but the main security office is opposite the disabled viewing area. It's next to the Old England pub so that the officers can keep an eye on what's going on there. And of course, in that office there is a full supply of first aid equipment too. And don't forget, those of you who can't wait till you get your pay at the end of the festival, there are some cash machines in the wall of the Old England pub.
now look at questions 14 to 20. As the interview continues, complete the sentences.
I do hope you will enjoy working with us this year. It's always good to see some of last year's faces back with us again. We hope this year to put on an even better festival than before. The first year we put on a festival, we called it the Mountain View Pop Concert. And it was a pop concert rather than a festival. We held it inside the castle and you could see the mountains in the background. It was very small and personal. Then we held it in front of the castle with the castle in the background, and then we started calling it the Castle Festival. Now, this year, we have moved further away into the fields. The advantage is that the castle and the mountains are both there in the distance, but we have as much space as we want in the fields. The only problem with the fields is that sheep use the fields during the spring months and they leave little messages for us all over the place. So please be careful and encourage the visitors to be careful too. Now, it just remains for me to let you know the times of your detailed briefings, which are as follows, and I'm telling you these as they are not, I repeat, not as written down on your welcome letters. Those of you who are working on the children's zone, your meeting is at 2 p.m. in campsite 2. Those of you on the security team need to meet behind the stage at 3:15 p.m. For the people on first aid, please do not meet in the first aid tent. There will not be enough room, but meet at the entrance gates at 4 p.m. Finally, we need everybody, and I do mean everybody, on duty on Monday morning at 8 a.m. for the final clean-up. I'd like to remind you that Monday is the final day of work, not the Sunday. People not coming to the final day will lose 50% of their pay. The meeting place for that is campsite 1. Now, good luck, and let's make this the best festival ever!
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Hello, Lorna, Ian. Glad you could make it. You're the only two who put your names down for this literature tutorial, so let's get started, shall we? I want to run over some aspects of the novel The Secret Garden with you before the test next week. Be sure to take some notes and ask questions if you need to.
Hey, Lorna, have you got a spare pen?
Sure, here you are.
OK, so the story follows two key characters. You should refer to them as protagonists, who go by the names of Mary Lennox and Colin Craven. The story is set shortly after the turn of the 20th century, and the narrative tracks the development of the protagonists as they learn to overcome their own personal troubles together.
That's quite a common storyline, isn't it?
Yes, you're right, Lorna. So what can you tell me about the character of Mary?
Well, in the beginning, she is an angry, rude child who was orphaned after a cholera outbreak and forced to leave India and move to the United Kingdom to her uncle's house in Yorkshire.
That's right. And there she meets Colin, who spends his days in an isolated room, believing himself to be permanently crippled, with no hope of ever gaining the ability to walk. The two strike up a friendship, and gradually learn, by encouraging each other, that they can both become healthy, happy and fulfilled in life.
Will we need to remember a lot of these details for the exam?
Just the basic outline. Examiners don't want to read a plot summary. They know what the book is about. Focus on narrative techniques instead, such as point of view.
What's that mean?
It's all about how we see the story. This story, for example, is written from the perspective of what is called an omniscient narrator. Omniscient means all-knowing. So, as readers, we get to see how all the characters feel about things, what they like and don't like, and what their motivations are in the story.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Won't it be hard to write a technical analysis? After all, it's a kid's book.
Well, it was initially pitched at adults, you know. But over the years it has become seen as a more youth-orientated work. And you're right in a sense. The simple vocabulary and absence of foreshadowing make the story very easy to follow and ideally suited for children. But that doesn't mean there isn't much to analyse. Look at the symbolism, for instance.
Symbols are things, right? Material things like objects that stand for abstract ideas.
Absolutely, yes. And the author uses many of them. There's the robin redbreast, for example, which symbolises the wise and gentle nature that Mary will soon adopt. Note that the robin is described as not at all like the birds in India. Roses are used as well, as a personal symbol for Mistress Craven. You'll see they're always mentioned alongside her name, and Mistress Craven's portrait can also be interpreted as a symbol of her spirit.
Are symbols just another name for motifs?
No, motifs are a bit different. They don't have as direct a connection with something the way that a symbol does. Motifs are simply recurring elements of the story that support the mood.
Are there any in this novel?
Yes, two very important ones. The Garden of Eden is a motif. It comes up a few times in connection with the garden of the story. And then you've got the role that secrets play in the story. In the beginning, everything is steeped in secrecy, and slowly the characters share their secrets, and in the process move from darkness to lightness, metaphorically, but also, in the case of Colin, quite literally. His room in the beginning has the curtains drawn, and he appears at the end in the brightness of the garden.
Anything else we need to know about?
Yes. Nearly all novels explore universal concepts that everyone has experienced. Things like love, family, loneliness, friendship. These are called themes. The Secret Garden has a few themes that all centre on the idea of connections. The novel explores, for example, the way that health can determine and be determined by our outlook on life. As Colin's health improves, so too do his perceptions of his strength and possibility. The author also examines the link between our environment and our physical and emotional prosperity. The dark, cramped rooms of the manor house stifle the development of our protagonists. The garden and natural environments allow them to blossom, just as the flowers do. Finally, this book looks at connections between individuals, namely Mary and Colin. This necessity of human companionship is the novel's most significant theme, because none of their development as individuals would have occurred without their knowing each other. Well, that about sums it up, I think.
That's a great help, thanks.
Yes, thanks very much.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. You will hear a talk on the topic of time perspectives. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Today, I'm going to be talking about time. Specifically, I'll be looking at how people think about time and how these time perspectives structure our lives. According to social psychologists, there are 6 ways of thinking about time, which are called personal time zones. The first 2 are based in the past. Past positive thinkers spend most of their time in a state of nostalgia, fondly remembering moments such as birthdays, marriages, and important achievements in their life. These are the kinds of people who keep family records, books, and photo albums. People living in the past negative time zone are also absorbed by earlier times, but they focus on all the bad things, regrets, failures, poor decisions. They spend a lot of time thinking about how life could have been. Then, we have people who live in the present. Present hedonists are driven by pleasure and immediate sensation. Their life motto is to have a good time and avoid pain. Present fatalists live in the moment too, but they believe this moment is the product of circumstances entirely beyond their control. It's their fate, whether it's poverty, religion, or society itself. Something stops these people from believing they can play a role in changing their outcomes in life. Life simply is, and that's that. Looking at the future time zone, we can see that people classified as future active are the planners and go-getters. They work rather than play and resist temptation. Decisions are made based on potential consequences, not on the experience itself. A second future-orientated perspective, future fatalistic, is driven by the certainty of life after death and some kind of a judgment day when they will be assessed on how virtuously they have lived and what success they have had in their lives. Okay, let's move on. You might ask, how do these time zones affect our lives? Well, let's start at the beginning. Everyone is brought into this world as a present hedonist. No exceptions. Our initial needs and demands, to be warm, secure, fed, and watered, all stem from the present moment. But things change when we enter formal education. We're taught to stop existing in the moment and to begin thinking about future outcomes. But did you know that every 9 seconds a child in the USA drops out of school? For boys, the rate is much higher than for girls. We could easily say, well, boys just aren't as bright as girls. But the evidence doesn't support this. A recent study states that boys in America, by the age of 21, have spent 10,000 hours playing video games. The research suggests that they'll never fit in the traditional classroom because these boys require a situation where they have the ability to manage their own learning environment. Now, let's look at the way we do prevention education. All prevention education is aimed at a future time zone. We say, don't smoke or you'll get cancer. Get good grades or you won't get a good job. But with present-orientated kids, that just doesn't work. Although they understand the potentially negative consequences of their actions, they persist with the behavior because they're not living for the future. They're in the moment right now. We can't use logic, and it's no use reminding them of potential fallout from their decisions or previous errors of judgment. We've got to get in their minds just as they're about to make a choice. Time perspectives make a big difference in how we value and use our time. When Americans are asked how busy they are, the vast majority report being busier than ever before. They admit to sacrificing their relationships, personal time, and a good night's sleep for their success. 20 years ago, 60% of Americans had sit-down dinners with their families, and now only 20% do. But when they're asked what they would do with an 8-day week, they say, that'd be great. They would spend that time laboring away to achieve more. They're constantly trying to get ahead, to get toward a future point of happiness. So, it's really important to be aware of how other people think about time. We tend to think, oh, that person's really irresponsible, or that guy's power hungry. But often, what we're looking at is not fundamental differences of personality, but really just different ways of thinking about time. Seeing these conflicts as differences in time perspective, rather than distinctions of character, can facilitate more effective cooperation between people and get the most out of each person's individual strengths.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers